Today we'll estimate the Hall coefficient of a given semiconductor, and the phenomena that we'll discuss is called Hall effect. Now this Hall effect was discovered in 1879 by Edwin Herbert Hall. At the time he was a graduate student at Johns Hopkins University. Now what is Hall effect? Whenever a current carrying conductor or semiconductor is placed in a transverse magnetic field, an electric field is induced perpendicular to the direction of magnetic field and the current as well. This phenomena is called Hall effect, and that electric field thus produced is called Hall field. We'll discuss more about Hall effect, but what is the application? Now, there are several applications of Hall effect. Now, out of all these, the essential one is to determine whether the given semiconductor is N-type or P-type semiconductor. And knowing that a Hall coefficient of that semiconductor, you can determine other quantities as well. Like you can determine the carrier concentration, you can determine mobility of that charges. So all other applications are dependent on that determination of Hall coefficients. Now we know that semiconductor can be classified into two types, the intrinsic one and extrinsic. In intrinsic one, the carrier concentration is very small. Example, group 4 element silicon or germanium. And if you look at this figure, this is a silicon atom combination. You observe that we actually know that in case of silicon, the outermost shell contains 4 valence electrons. Therefore, they form covalent bonds with neighboring atoms, so that the outermost shell has ultimately 8 electrons. Now, if you want to form an extrinsic semiconductor, then either you dope that group 4 element with group 5 element or group 3 element. If you dope with a group 5 element like phosphorus, then we know that in case of phosphorus, the outermost electron contains 5 electrons. Out of these 5, 4 are used for formation of covalent bond, and this one electron is loosely bound to that atom. Therefore, with the thermal agitation, that means with the help of minimum amount of energy which can be given from your room temperature, this electron can be made free. And since you are doping a large number of group 5 element into that group 4 element, you are actually creating a large number of electrons. Since the charges of electrons are negative, we call that type of extrinsic semiconductor as N-type semiconductor. On the other hand, when you dope group 4 element with any group 3 element like boron, then what will happen? You know, boron has 3 valence electrons. That means whenever a boron atom form covalent bond with neighboring silicon atoms, then there is an absence of electron, and we call that absence of electron as hole. Again, since you are actually doping a large number of boron atoms into the silicon, you are actually creating a large number of holes, that means absence of electrons. And since it is convention to say that the charge of holes is positive, so we call that type of extrinsic semiconductor as p-type semiconductors. So these are basically n-type and p-type, just the revision. You know about those things in your class, your standard. So by determining the Hall coefficient, we can say whether our given semiconductor is N-type or P-type. A small revision again. You know about electric field, and if a charge Q is present in an electric field, then the force exerted on that electric field can be said as Q into E. If Q is positive, then the force exerted on that charge will be in the same direction as E. On the other hand, if Q is negative, the force will be opposite to E. Whereas if a moving charge is placed in a magnetic field, then the force exerted on that moving charge is Q V cross B. It is Q V cross B. So here the magnitude of that force, the magnitude of the force is Q V B sine theta. That means if I say this is your V, this is the direction of B, and the angle between them is theta, then the magnitude of the force on the charge Q will be Q V B sine theta, where theta is the angle between the direction of magnetic field and velocity of the charge. If theta is 90 degree, that means if V and B are perpendicular to each other, then the magnitude will be only QVB, because sine theta will be 1. Now with that concept, we can try to understand the Hall effect. So this is your semiconductor slice, and this is the positive terminal, and this is the negative terminal of the battery. So this is the positive terminal, this is the negative terminal of the battery. So whenever the connection is completed, so if you complete the circuit, then what will happen? Whenever a charge comes, it will pass through the semiconductor by this way. I will observe it again. So this is your semiconductor slice. When battery is connected, this is how charges flow through the semiconductor. Okay. Now we are placing the whole setup into a transverse magnetic field. Transverse means perpendicular. Perpendicular to what? The magnetic field will be perpendicular to the direction of current. We have observed that the charges are flowing along this direction. This is the direction of charge flow. That means, and the charges we are considering here electrons. So conventional current will be opposite to this. So this is the direction of conventional current. So this is the direction of the conventional current. Therefore, magnetic field transverse means magnetic field will be perpendicular to the direction. So if current is along positive x-axis, magnetic field can be along positive y or negative y or positive z or negative z. So here we are applying magnetic field towards us. This magnetic field is of course perpendicular to the current direction, and we have assumed that it is along this direction. If we say this direction is say y direction, that is along y direction towards us, towards you, this magnetic field. So if we place this current carrying semiconductor into this magnetic field, we'll observe what is happening. So whenever new charges come, you'll observe that this charge, this electron is forced towards the bottom side of that semiconductor. So we'll observe that whenever a new charges or electron comes into that semiconductor, then that charge is forced towards the bottom portion of the semiconductor. Why is it so? Because we know that whenever a moving charge passes through a magnetic field, then a force is exerted on that on that charge, and we have observed that magnitude of that force is QVB sine theta. In the previous slide, we have observed that the force on that moving charge is QVB sine theta, and theta is the angle between the direction of force, direction of velocity and direction of current. And in this particular setup, we know that current and magnetic field are perpendicular to each other, or velocity of the charges and magnetic field are perpendicular to each other. As a result, theta is 90 degree and sine theta is 1. So the magnitude of the force exerted on the electron is QVB, and the direction is downward. And this is the reason that whenever an electron comes into the semiconductor, it is forced towards the bottom side of that semiconductor due to the force due to magnetic field. Okay. Now, if the process continues, then what we'll observe that a large number of electrons, there will be a large number of electrons present in the bottom portion of the semiconductor. Under that condition, whenever new charges come, the new charge doesn't deviate from its path. You observe in the previous slide, we have observed that whenever a new charges come, it is moved towards the bottom side of that semiconductor. And that's why you observe here there is some accumulation of electrons. There is some accumulation of electrons here. But after some accumulation of electrons at the bottom of the semiconductor, whenever new charges come, then we observe that the new charge doesn't deviate from its main path. Why is it so? It is like that there is some other force which is acting the upward direction, and these two forces now balance each other. We know there is a downward force due to the magnetic field present here. There is a downward force. This force exists. This force exists due to the presence of the magnetic field, and you know the magnitude of that force. That magnitude of the force is q v. So you cannot avoid that force. Still, you observe that the electron doesn't deviate. That means this force must be balanced by some other force acting in the upward direction like this. So what is the reason? To understand it, we observe that there are some accumulation of charges in the bottom portion. So these portion we have some charges, some electrons, and we know electrons are negatively charged. Whereas in the upper portion, on the roof of that semiconductor piece, there is no charge present. There is no charge present. That means we can say this upper portion, the upper side, this region is at higher potential with respect to the bottom side. The upper side must be at higher potential with respect to the bottom side. That means, in other words, there is a potential difference between the upper and lower side. There must be a potential difference between the upper and lower side. Again, why there is a potential difference? Because there is some accumulation of electrons in the lower side of that semiconductor block, and electrons are negatively charged. That means we can say this side is at lower potential with the upper side, or we can say upper side is at higher potential with respect to this side. That means there is a potential difference between them. And if there is a potential difference between 2 points, then there must be an electric field present there. And the direction of the electric field is from higher to lower potential. So whenever there is a potential difference, there must be an electric field present, and the direction of the electric field is from high to low potential. That means here there must be an electric field in this direction. So this must be the direction of the electric field. So this electric field is created due to presence of current carrying conductor in a transverse magnetic field. And this phenomena is called Hall effect. So again, what was Hall effect? Whenever a current carrying semiconductor is placed in a transverse magnetic field, transverse because magnetic field is perpendicular to the direction of current, then an electric field is created perpendicular to both the direction of magnetic field and current. You observe this, that was the direction of current, that is along x-axis. Along y-axis is your magnetic field, and electric field is generated along z-axis, perpendicular to both. This phenomena of generation of an electric field is called Hall effect, and this electric field thus produced is called Hall field. As simple as that. Therefore, these are the, and we know that if EH we say the Hall field, then the force exerted on that electron is Q into H. And these two forces, one due to the electric field and one due to the magnetic field, these two forces are opposite to each other, and at steady state their magnitudes are same, so they balance each other. That means their magnitudes and directions, magnitudes are same and directions are opposite. So finally, what you will observe that whenever now a new charge comes, new electron comes, then it goes undeviated due to the balance between the two equal and opposite forces. So if you connect a voltmeter between the upper and lower side of the semiconductor, if you connect a voltmeter between the upper and lower side of the semiconductor, you will observe a potential difference. You observe here that whenever you connect the voltmeter, there is a deflection. And from that deflection, we can measure the value of that voltmeter reading. That means the potential difference between the upper and lower side. We call that as Hall potential. So this is the basic thing. Now we'll observe how can we use it to estimate the Hall coefficient. Basically, we'll understand what is Hall coefficient and how Hall coefficient helps us to check whether the material is p-type or n-type semiconductor. So again, this is the force due to the magnetic field Q V cross B, and the if EH is the Hall field, then the force due to this Hall field is QEH. And we have observed that these two forces at steady state condition balance each other. Therefore, we can readily write Q into EH equal to QVB. Again, I am saying you that here sin theta is 1 because velocity and magnetic field are perpendicular to each other. Now, from our knowledge of current density means current passing per unit cross-section area. We know current passes through a wire generally. So if we consider a thin wire, then amount of current, and if the wire is a thick wire, then amount of current will be different. So if we want to understand the amount of current passing per unit area, then we will use current density, J. So current density is again current measured per unit area. That is, its unit is ampere per meter square. And this current density is related with Q, N, and V. Q is the charge of an charge of electron or charge of hole. N is the charge density or carrier density. That means number of carriers per unit volume. So if you are considering electrons, so it is number of electrons per unit volume, and V is the drift velocity of those charges. V is the drift velocity of those charges, So you observe here in the previous equation we have this QV, and here also we have, and that's why it is written. So we can replace this QV in terms of J by N. Why we are replacing? Because it is hard to determine this velocity. So if we replace it, then our equation will be Q into H as usual. Now instead of QV, we are writing J by N and then V. So if we rewrite this equation, in this way, that EH by JB, then it will be equals to 1 by NQ. From this equation, we can say that EH by JB equals to 1 by NQ. That quantity, EH by JB, is called Hall coefficient. This quantity is called Hall coefficient. Now, understand one thing. To observe Hall effect, you require two basic quantities. You require current or current density, and you must require magnetic field. If either of these two, that means if either of current and magnetic field is absent, then you cannot observe Hall effect. So these are your inputs. Current or current density and magnetic field are your input. They are your essential inputs. And as a result of Hall effect, you are getting Hall field, an electric field, which we call as Hall field. Therefore, Hall field is your output. So Hall coefficient is nothing but output by inputs. So your Hall coefficient is the Hall field per unit magnetic field per unit current density. That is defined as Hall coefficient. And from this formula, we get that Hall coefficient is nothing but 1 by NQ. So if we want to estimate RH, then we need to require N, that is carrier density, amount of charges per unit volume, and charge of each, that are required. Now charge of electron, you know, Q is known 1.6 × 19 coulomb, but it is very hard to determine this N quantity. That is number of charges per unit volume. So we cannot estimate RH from 1 by NQ. We'll use it in the other way, but we'll determine RH from this formula EH by J. How will you determine it? Let's see. First thing, you need to find out the Hall field EH, that is electric field due to Hall effect. That is essential to find out. instead of finding out the electric field, it is easier to find out the potential difference between the two points. We know that Hall field, this EH, is generated between the upper side and lower side of the semiconductor. So instead of estimating this EH, it will be wiser if we find out the potential difference between these two. And it is easy to find out the potential difference. You just connect a voltmeter between these 2 points. You just connect a voltmeter between these 2 points, and you will get the value of the potential difference. So VH is easy to calculate. And then EH will be this potential difference divided by the separation. So separation, say this separation is Y. You can say any name. I'm giving the name as say Y. So say this separation, that means distance between upper and lower side is say Y. Then electric field will be VH by Y. Done. Next we require current density. We can connect an ammeter here to measure the amount of current flowing through this circuit. So I is easy to determine. I can be easily determined. But what about current density? Current density is current per unit area. Which area? You know that current is passing through this area. So this is your area. This is the area. This is the area through which current is passing. Now we have said this length is Y. As per manual, we have defined this length is Y Z, and we are assuming say this length is Z. Then area will be YZ. So current density is I by YZ. B is there. If we do the simplification, y cancel out. What we have? Z by I, VH by B. So if we know these 4 quantities, Z, I, VH and B, we know the Hall coefficient. Z, the dimension of the semiconductor, is given. So we need not to bother about the dimension. It is given. And in the first class, I told you that whatever will be given to you, you treat it as constant. This is not your variable. You need not to bother about it. You just treat that value as constant. So actually you have 2 inputs, I and B, and 1 output, VH. So you can determine RH for a particular set of IB, VH. But if we do that, that will be an erroneous result, because we are not certain that there is no random error introduced in that observation. In the previous class, Sir has told you about random errors which generally occurs in any experiment. So if we do a calculation with a single value of IB and VH, then it is highly probable that random occur will occur. So what we'll do? We'll do in this particular experiment, we'll fix this current. Throughout this experiment, the current passing through the semiconductor remains fixed. The current passing through the semiconductor remains fixed and will vary magnetic field. And as a result, it is expected that we'll get a different values of VH. We'll get different value of VH for different set of B. So from that, we'll draw a graph of B versus VH. We'll draw a graph of B versus VH, and from that graph, we'll take a particular set of B and VH. And for that set, we'll calculate RH. We'll discuss in detail with the graph. And the point we are coming back is that if we know RH, what would be our benefit? Now you observe closely that from the formula we derive, we know that RH equals to 1 by NQ. RH equals to 1 by NQ. Now if it is a p-type material, we know that in p-type material majority carriers are holes. That means Q will be positive. And if Q is positive, RH is positive. So for p-type material, RH is essentially positive. On the contrary, if your semiconductor is n-type semiconductor, that means majority carriers are electrons. If the majority carriers are electrons, then Q is essentially negative. And if Q is negative, RH is negative. So logic is very simple. If RH is positive, then semiconductor is p-type semiconductor. If RH is negative, then semiconductor is n-type semiconductor. So what we'll do, we'll determine RH, we'll check whether RH is positive or negative. If RH is positive, we'll say the semiconductor is p-type semiconductor. If RH is negative, we'll say the semiconductor is n-type semiconductor. And if we know RH, With the help of conductivity, we can also calculate mobility. We can find out the charge density from this expression and so on and so on. So the basic thing is that you need to measure three quantities: the current passing through the semiconductor I, magnetic field B, and these are inputs, and you need to measure the Hall field VH, Hall potential, better to say. How will you do that? Now, the current passing through the semiconductor, so for that you require a current source. That current source will be supplied through our instrument, we will observe it. For the magnetic field, you will use an electromagnet. You will use an electromagnet. What is an electromagnet? Electromagnet is a large number of coils. You observe here there is a large number of coils here. When current passes through this electromagnet, then it is activated and magnetic field is generated here in between the pole pieces. Magnetic field is generated between the pole pieces. So if you place your specimen, if you place your semiconductor between the two pole pieces, then magnetic field is exerted on that semiconductor. So point is, for this electromagnet you require another current source. So this is the current source for the electromagnet. We'll call that current as a coil current, because now we are using two current sources. Remember, one current source is for to supply current to the semiconductor, that I, which is essential for the Hall effect, and to use this electromagnet you require another current source. So this current source is for the electromagnet only. If we increase the current in the electromagnet, more amount of magnetic field will be increased, more amount of magnetic field will be generated. So we'll increase this current through this source and magnetic field will be generated. But how will we measure that amount of magnetic field? For that we'll use this device called Gauss meter. Why is it called Gauss meter? Because here we are measuring magnetic field in unit of Gauss. That's why it's called Gauss meter. Like if we measure voltage with the help of our device, we call it voltmeter. To measure current in ampere, we say the device is ammeter. Similarly, this one is Gauss meter. This is the whole setup. This is your electromagnet. This is your Gauss meter. This instrument supplies current to the electromagnet, and this instrument supplies the current into the semiconductor. You can measure that with the help of this display. We will observe it, and the same instrument is used to measure the potential difference, VH. This is your sample. This is your this small portion, this region. This is your sample. This is your semiconductor. This semiconductor is placed between the pole pieces of this magnet. So it is placed in between these two pole pieces. This is your electromagnet. This is the Hall effect setup. We will observe when you do the experiment again. You observe there are two displays. One for observing the amount of current in milliampere. Other one is to observe the amount of voltage, that is the VH value, in unit of millivolt. So both are measured in terms of milli. And there is a knob. If you connect the knob this direction, then you will observe the current. If you connect the knob along this direction, you will observe the voltage. So I will show you. And this is the electromagnet power supply. This device is used to supply current into the electromagnet only, and it is in terms of amperes. So a large amount of current is passing through this, and you can adjust it by using this knob. So basically, this is the application we have said. So basically, what you do in your experiment, you will supply some coil current starting from 0 to 1 ampere. For all of this coil current, you will get some amount of magnetic field in Gauss. So you will measure the magnetic field, and when you will get the magnetic field and coil current, and you are supplying a particular amount of current into the semiconductor. That I. Remember, you require current into the semiconductor and you require the magnetic field both to get the Hall effect. So this is and I told you that in this experiment we'll fix the current passing through the semiconductor. So at the time of exam, any value can be given. Say you are asked that fix the current to the semiconductor as 5 milliampere. So this will be fixed to 5 milliampere then. Then what we will need to do? We need to vary the magnetic field. And for that, what we'll do? We'll change the current through the electromagnet by this changing coil current. So for different coil currents, we will get different values of magnetic field and we will also measure the output, that is Hall voltage VH. So now I'm switching it off